All right. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Robin Howe, and I'm the Vice President of Sarasota University. And today is January 18th, and this is part of our monthly series, our Montessori Colloquia, that we put on. And it's not just for our Sarasota University community, but this is meant to be for the entire Montessori community. So many people here, as you may see, or not part of Sarasota community, but it's something that we're doing, and it's meant to bring other Montessorians together and address and discuss really important issues in Montessori education. So again, this is always the third Wednesday of every month at 7 p.m. Eastern. And there are various ways to get the email, but if you're interested, you can go to Sarasota University, Montessori Foundation, CGMS, different organizations are sharing that information. And so we're glad to have people join us. And again, as I mentioned, addressing various topics. So today we have Ms Christine Lowry joining us today. So first of all, Christine, thank you so much for joining us today. This is your first time joining us for one of our colloquia, and she's going to be talking about inclusive education in Montessori. And I'll give her an introduction. But before we do that, I actually wanted to do another special recognition or greeting to Dr. Michael Levins, who is joining us today. So Dr. Michael Levins, and I'll let him say something real quick, is the new president of Sarasota University. And this is the first time we've offered the colloquium since Michael has joined us. And so I wanted to recognize you, Michael, share that exciting news. If you wanted to say anything quickly before we further, but I just wanted to welcome you and say we're so thrilled to have you as part of what we're doing at Sarasota University.
Well, thank you so much, Robin and Christine. I look forward to the topic. It's just going to be fantastic. And hi to everyone. I am honored to be with Sarasota University and to be part of this wonderful community. So I can't wait to meet all of you, and I'm excited about the colloquium.
Thank you, Michael. So yeah, so again, as I mentioned, we do this every month, and Christine, for those of you who are joining us late just minutes ago, agreed to be our February speaker, and I'll let you talk, Christine, about how this may turn into sort of a two-part series. But obviously what Christine is talking about today is inclusive education in Montessori, which I think is a topic that is, even if it's not necessarily our specialty, is something that many of us are dealing with. And so Christine comes to us with many years of experience as a Montessori educator. I'd say, Christine, I'll let you speak a little bit more to that, but with her specialty being special education or inclusive education, and how it's not really something separate from Montessori. And I think that's sort of the topic today that you're going to address, is how is inclusive education, or what is it, and how is it incorporated in Montessori? So without taking up too much time, I want to give the floor to you, Christine, but I'll also share that while you're doing this, if you have questions, I'll be moderating the chat. If you're not actively speaking at some point, please mute your microphone. And then I believe that what Christine is going to do is basically take us through a series of talking points and then opening it up for discussion. So again, please mute your mics. I'm recording this. I will monitor the chats. And with that, Christine, I'm going to let you get started on this very important topic. And again, I want to thank you so much on behalf of Sarasota University. Personally, as a friend, it's great to see you, and I look forward to learning from you and hearing what you got to say.
Thank you so much, Robin. I really appreciate it. So I thought I would share a bit more about me as we begin to explore the intersection of Montessori and inclusive education. Yeah. My first experience of Montessori was as a mom looking for a program that I could feel comfortable having my daughter benefit from. But as a special educator, my first impression of walking into that classroom the first day as a visiting parent was, this is a philosophy, this is a manner of working with children that is so congruent with what at that time we were calling children with special needs. That experience really put me on a different trajectory in my life. I decided to do my Montessori teacher education, and my year-long project when I was in training was to found my own school, because I had this idea that I could start a Montessori school that could serve all kinds of children. And I could combine what I was learning about Montessori education and philosophy with what I already knew about special education. I was particularly interested in working with young children because I'd been working with adolescents, and I saw the pain that comes with a student not getting the kind of support that they need until they're 13, 14, 15 years old. And I had this naive sort of private little idea that I can serve all kinds of children. And this is a philosophy and pedagogy that's really going to help me do that. So moving forward quite a few years, found another Montessori school and earning a pandemic second master's degree in early childhood special education. So all of these years later, my work really feels like it has gone full circle, because now I take the knowledge that I have of Montessori and the knowledge that I have of inclusive education, and I work with Montessori schools and Montessori educators to help them learn those same things from the other side of it. How can I help them understand that this wide range of diversity of students that we're seeing of all ages today is really what inclusion is all about? And yes, there's some knowledge that we need, not unlike the broader world of education. There's some next practice, as my friend John Wolfe refers to it as, that we can use to serve and support a wide range of students. So I really appreciate this opportunity, Robin. I know you've thanked me several times, but I can't thank you enough for giving me this opportunity, because I feel like it's really, to use a Montessori term, this is my cosmic task. This is my meaningful and this is my purposeful work in life. I love it. And I am really looking forward to this brief amount of time together to hopefully plant some seeds, to give you some things to reflect upon. But as we come together as a community, really appreciating how can we incorporate our philosophy and our pedagogy with new knowledge and current research on working with all kinds of children. So I have a brief PowerPoint that I would like to share here. And as Robin said, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we will have a chunk of time at the end to just have a conversation together about all of this. Okay. So just briefly, so you know where we're going to go in the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to talk briefly about today's children, because there are some differences, and those of us who have been in education for more than even 5 years can appreciate that there is a difference in today's children and in their families. We're going to look at what is inclusive education and why is inclusive education becoming the dominant trend in the world of education right now. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means for our role as classroom educators and as school leaders. And then I'm briefly going to talk about some what are generally accepted components of a successful inclusive classroom, mostly as a starting point for your thinking, and maybe a little bit of, hey, I want to learn more about that. Okay. So today's children. I know that many of us are getting tired of hearing the pandemic, right? It's gone, it's done. We don't need to worry about it anymore. But interestingly, in the research, in the field out there of experts who study these sorts of things, this period of time is being referred to as collective trauma. This is a global collective trauma where for a pretty large chunk of time, we had a lot of inconsistency. We had a lack of predictability. Our lives were in many ways kind of turned upside down. And even when it started to look a little bit more like what we were used to, there still was this underlying current of, I'm not sure. And one of the things that happens with collective trauma is that people's autonomic nervous systems kind of acclimate to a more hyper alert stage where we're kind of We're on edge a lot of the time, okay? Our children have not been immune to this. We at least have some cognitive way of trying to understand all of this, but many of our children really don't, and they're just absorbing the stress and the tension of their world, of their families, of if they were lucky enough to continue in their Montessori classrooms or other classrooms, there still was this level of tension. On top of that, we know that there is a very large number of students who are experiencing what is called complex trauma. So it's more the kind of the traditional definition of trauma, if you will, of event specific or a chronic ongoing, the neglect, abuse, emotional abuse, that kind of poverty, that kind of thing. So what we're seeing a lot today, and again, this is documented research and in the literature that's starting to come out all the time, we are seeing what's being referred to as developmental delays, particularly in our younger students, in speech and language, in motor skills. I don't like to think of it really as developmental delays because a delay implies that a child is behind someone else or is behind the norm. But this has been a global pandemic. So who are we behind? Okay, just plant that seed to think about. We were seeing an increase in difficulty with processing sensory input before the pandemic. It has skyrocketed since then. And many of the children that we are working with right now, whether they have been identified with a categorical label or not, are experiencing difficulties managing sensory input. We're seeing a lot of difficulties with emotional well-being, right? We've all heard the statistics about the number of students who have maybe talked about suicide, if not actually, engaged in some suicidal activity. We know that we are seeing many children who are having difficulty with regulation. And to a certain extent, I think we might be having that difficulty as well. We know that children of students of every level have really lost time in a way to develop the kind of social skills that they might have by a certain chronological age. And one of the things I love about Montessori so much is that we don't, we consider it because of the society that we live in, but really Montessori education is about developmental growth and development. And where is this child and what is developmentally appropriate for the student that I'm working with? So people say, well, why all of this? Why is this happening? Well, yeah, we had a pandemic, but what else? Well, think about the changes in our society just over the past 10 years. Much more sensory input, rapid pace, right? We're always being bombarded with more and more and more. And it feels busier and busier and busier. But at the same time, and I consider it a silver lining opportunity to make it that, is that it's interesting from the history of pandemics, people study this sort of thing. Along with a pandemic tends to come major social changes. And when we think about the social changes that have happened just in the United States in the past 18 to 24 months, it's both exciting and can be a little like, change is not always the easiest thing in the world for any of us. So what does this mean for our children? Well, I have to preface and stop and say that when I use the word children, anybody under the age of 18 is a child to me, okay? So I'll just use those two words interchangeably, but please know that I'm talking about all of them, okay? So again, we're seeing a different rate of development in gross and fine motor skills across the board. In language development, both processing of language and engaging in written language, we're seeing a lot of differences that I hear from Montessori teachers on a regular basis. Again, the sensory processing, but how that impacts students' emotional regulation and their social interaction skills. we may be seeing, and if you were in a classroom or you were a school leader, you may be hearing that what is up with these children? They're not normalizing in the way that I have come to expect. They have shorter attention spans. They're just not able to sustain that kind of attention that we might have seen in the past. They're easily distracted. They're hyper aware of everything that is around all the time. So we are seeing differences in behaviors, but we are also seeing differences in the process and the rate of learning. And some of the science around that can be a big aha for a lot of Montessorians, because the literature and the research is beginning to come out is that children learn better in small groups than in individual instruction. Think about that one for a moment, Montessorians. So when we're talking about today's children, we need to talk about inclusive Montessori classrooms. As I said, inclusion has been developing actually since the early 90s. And it, we have this whole body of research now about it, but it has become the dominant trend in the broader world of education. And I'm hearing more and more that it is becoming a trend in Montessori schools. So we see this wide range of abilities in learning, managing emotions, social skills. But what we know as Montessorians, what we've always known as Montessorians, thank you, Dr. Montessori, and our own experience and our own sensitivity to children, is that they all need to feel accepted and respected, and that they belong, and that they can be a positive contributor to the classroom community that they find themselves in. So what do we mean by inclusive education? What do we mean by inclusive classrooms? Well, this is my write-up of the definition, but the definitions generally include this kind of consistent language, okay? Inclusive classrooms are those that provide equitable opportunities and meaningful opportunities for all students. One of the confusions about education is that it's not, okay, we'll have children that have IEPs, we'll have children that have been diagnosed with this or that or the other disability into our classroom, and we'll do the best we can with serving them. When we look at what inclusive classrooms and what inclusion education really is, we see that it benefits all students with the practices of inclusive education. So we really are talking about every student. It means that every student has full access, is able to participate in the learning and all of the activity that goes on in the classroom. Every student gets the supports that they need. Some need some that are a little bit more intense than others, but all students have strengths and all students have challenges. And we look through the lens of inclusion, we look at how do I help every student in my classroom feel like they belong? Because I want every single one of them to really thrive and grow and develop as a positive member of this community. In today's world of special education, we have absolutely, definitely moved away from the old-fashioned, outdated medical deficit model of ability. Unfortunately, there are some people still, even in the Montessori community, who are teaching from that model. But the model that we are really thinking of, think of inclusive education and today's special education, is the social model of disability. This is a model that really focuses on a child's strengths, every child's strengths. Yeah, they have challenges, they all have challenges, but we're really going to look at how can we observe those strengths to really support them with the areas in which they are challenged. We're focusing on the whole child. And as Montessorians, we've always done that, right? Every single domain of development is part of what we are helping to teach and to guide our students towards in a positive way in our classrooms. So as adults in inclusive classroom, our explicit role is to remove barriers, or as Dr. Montessori referred to them, obstacles to each child's success. So a couple of principles I want you to just think about. Again, this is about planting seeds. No, we don't have a very long time together, but to get you to think about some things. Dr. Montessori told us that every child is born ready to learn, right? Dr. Montessori actually, in a way, maybe not as explicitly as I am saying it tonight, but said all children have strengths and all children have, we can call them challenges, but not an equal rate of growth and development in every developmental domain. What we know from neuroscience is that diversity is just, it means difference. It's just a natural, normal difference in humans. And I know Tim is on the call, and I think he would agree with me, and in animals as well. They have a temperament, they have a personality. So diversity is just part of living species on Earth, right? So when we look at behaviors, when we strip the view of judgment away and our expectations of the way children should, would, could, we don't see behaviors as good or bad. We see behaviors as communication, and that every child is doing the best they can in that moment, so that it tells us, okay, here is a place where if I really respect where this child is, if I really accept this child, I can guide this child towards more positive ways of getting their needs met. So I honestly believe that in this time, and again, with knowledge and with skills and developing over a process, this is not a boom, done, one, and we're ready to go. But really, the challenge is ours to stay calm, to see each child, to really observe behavior, to assume positive intent in every child's behavior, so that we can teach and guide each one. From Dr. Dan Siegel, all children, students, I'll switch to students for a moment, need to feel emotionally safe. They need to feel seen or understood, like somebody gets them. They need to know that there's an adult there to comfort them. And with that, they will all feel secure in our classrooms. So when we look at, so what are these components of an inclusive classroom? Well, remember, if our goal is to remove the obstacles that limit full access, full participation, and a sense of belonging and success, we look at the prepared adult through the lens of inclusion. We look at the prepared physical environment, but now through the lens of inclusion. We look at what I call responsive guidance, which is really based on the idea of preventing, or to the best of our ability, minimizing, again, removing the obstacles by guiding and teaching. And this is kind of the opposite, if you will, of the connotations that the word discipline and managing have come to take on, because too often those turn into micromanaging. So this is a mindset shift of how are we going to move to guiding and teaching students rather than correcting students' behavior and expecting them to do certain things. And if they don't, then there must be something wrong there, okay? We also have to look at how are we going to differentiate instruction. This is different than individualizing instruction. This is looking at how does each student learn? How can I vary the presentations and that sort of thing? We'll talk a little bit more about it in a moment. So I want us for just a moment to return to Dr. Montessori. I'm going to move this over here. The real preparation for education is the study of oneself. The training of the teacher, who is to help life, is something far more than a learning of ideas. It includes the training of character. It is the preparation of spirit. So what does that mean? It means that the number one tool that we have in inclusive classrooms is relationship. When we can allow ourselves to have relationship with children. And I know that sometimes we hear this, well, the Montessori teacher is supposed to be sort of aloof, kind of standoffish, kind of let the children do their thing. Well, yes, of course. But we know that in order to feel emotionally secure, A student has to have an emotional attachment, not that's going to impact their independence, that's going to give them that sense of security so that they can branch out, so that they can learn, so they can interact with other students. So it's that relationship piece that I think might be different for some of our community, but we know it's so important for today's children. So we need to think about our self-awareness and how we manage those things that trigger us, those things that stress us. We're going to get triggered. We're going to get stressed. It's what we do with that. Because when we can stay regulated, when we can come to a place of calm in interacting with our students and in our classroom, we're providing co-regulation for them. Younger children, and to a certain extent older students as well, develop in a progressive way their own regulation by interacting with, by their mirror neurons imitating, if you will, unconsciously, a calm adult. So that's a big part of the learning that can happen. So how do we have a mindset, right? We have to be curious. We have to wonder. We have to understand that learning new habits and ways of thinking and behaving does not mean that what we have done our entire career has been wrong. It means that we are evolving as Montessorians in the exact same way that Dr. Montessori did. We are following in her footsteps of always putting the needs of the child first and really thinking about how can I best serve today's children. So quickly, when we're looking at an environment through the lens of inclusion, less is more. So I'll let you read the slide here. If you have not muted yourself, could you please do that? Thank you. Because we've got children that have so many difficulties with sensory input challenges, we want to reduce the visual clutter and the auditory clutter, okay, that their perception is clutter. So we don't have to have out every Montessori material known to man at the beginning of the year. We put materials in as children in the classroom need to use them, and we take materials out that are no longer being used. So I want to have time for us to talk, so I'm going to go on. Responsive guidance, as I said, focuses on prevention rather than reacting to challenging behavior. We're looking at what can I do? What are those barriers? What are those obstacles in the classroom that I can really begin to think through so that it minimizes and prevents some of these difficulties in behavior and in learning that I'm seeing. We're teaching explicit behavior goals rather than assuming behavior expectations. We need to learn how to teach to emotional well-being. And a lot of this we already know. This is today's language, but much of this we already have if we stop and think about it. We can learn some new things about social emotional growth and learning, and we can use the 5 components of SEL. There's a lot of information out there, and it fits in beautifully with Montessori classrooms. So it's an area where we can do some new thinking and maybe learn some new habits. But we really want to be explicit in how we create this inclusive classroom where everyone feels like they belong. When we're talking about differentiated instruction, what we're really talking about is how do I personalize my instruction to meet the needs of the children in my classroom? So for example, in this photograph, this is a child that I had the honor to teach at one point who, oh, by the way, happens to have Down syndrome, which in many ways was kind of beside the point. She did have some motor issues. She definitely had some sensory issues. Normally, I would say to a child when they're writing on a chalkboard, you need to take that to a table. We sit up when we're writing, or at the very least, your chalkboard needs to be on a work rug, right? And oh, that book that you were looking at, you need to put that away before you get out the chalkboard. I know all those things as Montessorian. However, this child was, for one of the first times, picking up a writing instrument on her own. This was a self-chosen work, was working on it independently. And I know from looking at what looked like scribbles on that board, She was trying to write the letters of her name. That's personalized learning. There was no way I was going to interrupt that beautiful opportunity that she had created for herself. So we can vary our presentations, we can vary our expectations, not that we don't still have freedom with structure, we still have the structure, but it's thinking about each child. It's seeing what mastery looks like for each child. This is referred to in the broader world of education. And again, it fits in beautifully, and we could use it in the Montessori community, universal design for learning. Been around for, I think, 15, 20 years, something like that, is gaining more traction as we talk about inclusive classrooms. It's a way of explicitly setting a goal, determining a lesson, how am I going to vary that presentation, and maybe even the material I use for that child or that small group of children. And what is mastery going to look like for that child? It might look different. For one student might write a report, another student might create a PowerPoint, another student might capture a video and share that to show what they've learned and how they're able to use that. So this is not something that we're going to take time to do now, but if you'd like to write it down, this is a reflection that I have found really, really helpful in working with Montessori schools and Montessori educators. It comes from Elena Aguilera. I have to give her credit for it. She is not a Montessorian by training, but she definitely is in heart. I don't think she knows it, but she is. And this is one of her suggested reflections, and I just love it so much, that if we think about the beliefs that we hold about Montessori classrooms, about children, and then think about how might those beliefs be informing my expectations and impacting my behavior in the classroom. And is that who I want to be in the classroom? I think those are important things for us to continue to think about. So when we look at these beliefs, how do we know they're true? How are they impacting our behavior? And if you see behavior that maybe you're realizing is not as productive now as maybe it was at one time, right? You're learning new things all of the time. Maybe you want to really expand your next practice. What might be the new habits? What may be the knowledge and the skill that you might want to gain? So that you could really think about, where do I want to take myself as a Montessorian serving children? So I'm going to unshare here. Stop share, excuse me, proper language. There we go. Okay. So we've got about 20 minutes, comments, questions, curiosities, responses, reactions.
First of all, Christine, I want to thank you so much for that. I know it's a short amount of time to jam so many things in. I do have I want to say a couple of things, and then I want to share a question that just came in as a comment. So again, thank you. And then for those of you that find this in an area of interest or something that you feel like you need, Christine, Christine does a lot of workshops with the Montessori Foundation all over the world. So with all of our different platforms, so we can share that as well. And I do want to talk a little bit about Sarasota University at the very end as well. But one of the questions that came up first was a Priya, and Priya, oh goodness, maybe Priya, I might ask you to share this. You shared your name, Priya
Rajagopalan. It's okay.
Exactly. Well, I'll let you ask that question then, because it's an important question, if you're willing.
Yes. Thank you, Christine, so much. I was just trying to, further clarify for myself the difference between differentiated instruction and individualized instruction. I know you touched upon it, but I would, it'll just help me to understand it better if you could elaborate.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much for asking it. So what I hear from Montessorians, okay, when they talk about, or when we do as a community, sometimes when we talk about individualized instruction, what we tend to mean is, I'm going to give a child or a group of children a lesson because I know what lesson they've had before that. that I'm going to give that lesson the way I've been taught to give that lesson. This is what the presentation looks like, and this is how we do the presentation. And I'm going to teach the child how to use that material in the way that it was taught to me. And that, yes, in a sense, that's individualized because we're not giving a lesson until we know a student is ready, right? Differentiated instruction is rather, I'm going to teach in a way that's systematic and cumulative so that knowledge builds on itself. And I'm going to be aware of a student's prior knowledge before I teach them a next bit that expands that prior knowledge. But the way that I present that knowledge might be different. The way, or even the material that I use might be a different material. The focus becomes on the skill and the concept that I want to teach, that the student is ready to learn, rather than the use of the material and presenting it in the way that might be considered, this is the classic way that we present this material. So let me give you a very, very brief example, okay? I was talking with the head of school earlier this week. There is a young man in their lower elementary classroom who has really, I think, probably could be identified as having a sensory processing disorder. It's not just kind of a hyped up nervous system, but this child actually has pretty ongoing chronic difficulties with all kinds of sensory information. He was having difficulty in the classroom, so they have set up a quiet place for him in a different building where he can go when he's feeling overwhelmed, trying to help him learn self-awareness. So the work that he was sent over with was the stamp box. The head of school was sitting with him as he was kind of all over the place, and he was tapping his fingers, and he was trying, he really wanted to, but she noticed pretty quickly on that managing those small tiles and lining them up in a row was just a skill that he could not manage. And she then said to him, "Are you distracted by these tiles?" And he couldn't even speak. He was so overwhelmed. He just nodded his head, yes. And she said, "Do you want me to find something else for you to do this work?" He was doing it, obviously, right? And he said yes. And then he whispers out, "I think I can do it without any materials." So she gave him a multi-digit equation to solve. And in fact, he was able to do it. He had moved to the point of abstraction. He didn't even need a material. That's an example of differentiated instruction. Does that clear up the difference for you?
Yes, thank you so much.
Welcome. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
And we've had a couple other questions come in the meantime. And so let's see, hold on. Vijay, oh my goodness. Shankar Chakravarthi, hope I did that well.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm doing my best. She asked the question, actually, maybe you could ask your question because I don't quite understand it, but you said, how do you parent equipping? Maybe you want to ask your question if you're willing.
So how do you equip parents to understand your inclusion strategies and also how they can support the child at home? So this is my question.
What was the second part?
And how do you help them support the child at home?
Oh, at home.
Oh, working with a child that has sensory issues at home?
Yes, yes. As well as in the classroom. So they might feel that my child is not getting as much as other children. So what is actually happening? So how do you educate the parents on the child's, the strategies used for the child? Besides, how do you help them to actively support their child at home? That's it.
Oh, I'm Montessori on children with different needs, special needs.
It really is truly a wonderful question. I have to be honest with you. It's a question that to answer would take hours and hours and hours because, again, we are, the word in the broader world of education is personalizing learning. So I would want to know what are your child's strengths and how can we build on those? And what are the challenges that you're seeing in your child? And what is the home setting like? I mean, there would just be lots and lots of questions that to make any kind of suggestions at all that would make sense. So one thing that you could do, if you think that your child has some difficulty with sensory input, is to go to, it's called the Star Institute for Sensory Processing. I think their website is, well, I don't remember, but you can search STAR, S-T-A-R, Institute for Sensory Processing.org. They are a reputable organization. There is a lot of stuff out there on the internet that is not exactly provided by people who are occupational therapists with an expertise in sensory processing. So I love your question, and you might want to look on the International Montessori Council Montessori Foundation courses list, and you might find something there. That would be a course that you might want to take that would help you answer your question. Thank you. All right, Robin.
All right, let's see.
So much. Thank you so much.
All right.
Reducing
Unbelievable.
materials and clutter when there are students with huge spans of needs. Yes. When we start thinking about it, the huge span might actually not be that huge. If you really look at what is each student interested in and ready for, there are ways that we can reduce the amount of materials that we have on the shelf. We can actually reduce the number of shelves. I've worked with schools where we did a makeover at their classrooms. So the auditory clutter is things like, having rugs around the room that absorb sound. If you've got hardwood or laminate floors of some kind, sometimes you can put baffling up on the walls that will reduce some of the auditory sound that's coming into the classroom. And those are some things that you can look at. Do we want to call on Dr. Lorenz and then we'll come back to chat? Hello, Dr. Lorenz, would you like to unmute and share your question or your comment?
Yes, thank you, Christine, for being here this afternoon. I work with Sarasota University and teach in the master's program. And one of the things that I think is premier about what you've spoken about regarding not only inclusionary programs with Montessori, but by the fact that we identify diversity, inclusion, and equity, or EDI, and the value of that coined phrase that is beginning to evolve across the nation and the world is really about the very simplistic aptitudes of our abilities as Montessori trained people. Because when we think about how we were presented by our trainers, the multiple lessons, in the template form of any presentation is the individualization based on age appropriate mastery levels, isolating the difficulty, creating control of error within the construct of that said piece of equipment, and moreover the extensions and variations, right? And those pieces are what I believe, and I hear you sharing this, is that as Montessorians, we become such very acute observers of that individualization of the child that sometimes we not necessarily miss, but we are askew. We're just not quite there to say that society tells us that that child has a disability or a misbehavior or needs a timeout, right? As you say, there's lots of information out there about discipline to redirect, but we have to first identify the problem. And our ability to be acute observers, I think, is how what I really appreciate you sharing connects with the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because Montessori is holistic. Montessori is from a humanist standpoint. I've always said to Montessori educators, if you become Montessori educator, you are a special educator because you recognize each and every child for their differing abilities. So I really thank you for that opportunity to acquiesce and provide that comment.
You're welcome. Yeah. I'm just going to, just in response to that, I oftentimes, though, see Montessori educators in the classroom, and it may be because of the stress, it may be, and who knows, right? But that say to me, I don't have time to observe. I can't observe, with this sense of if I don't keep a lid on it all the time, it's just going to, it's going to be chaos. And I absolutely, truly believe every single thing that you said. I think one of the things that we can, those of us who've been doing this for a while, can help some of our newer Montessorians who are now in the field post-training is to remember to, as we're talking about the planes of development of the teacher, if you will, revisiting some of those things and what it, observation, I mean, I think you'd agree with me. Observation means something very different to a person who's been in the classroom for 5 years versus someone who's brand new in the classroom, right? So how can we provide sort of the continuing education, I guess, in a way, is where I'm going with this, for all of our teachers, because when we get back to our roots, when we get back to our real philosophy and our pedagogy, I agree with you. We have so much of what we already need. Yeah. So thank you very much. Yeah. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
See, thoughts about helping special ed teachers and general education teachers address explicit instruction in general ed Montessori classrooms. It is one of the models of inclusion, that co-teaching model where there's a special educator and a educator teaching a classroom. It's not a model that has gained a lot of traction because it would be extraordinarily expensive to do that. A model that does seem to be working and gaining some traction is special educator using a push-in model where they come into the classroom at certain times and they work with, yes, an identified student, but they might work with a small group of students who have the same need and haven't yet been identified, right, or ever will be. So in that way, they are supporting direct instruction for children, but they also, more and more special education teachers are moving into the role of coaches and consulting, because they do have a body of knowledge that is different from the Montessori general education teacher. But in helping that general ed teacher learn, using that coaching and that consultation model seems to be one that is working really, really well. So that's kind of my 2 cents about that, for what it's worth. If you are interested in that, Lucy, there's a book that I can highly, highly, highly recommend. The lead author is Julie Costin, and the book is titled Reimagining Special Education. The subtitle is something about diversity, equity, and inclusion for all in inclusive Montessori classrooms. It's from Brooks Publishing. It's outstanding. Outstanding. Julie Costin is one of my heroes. I'll just be quite transparent about it. She's one of my heroes, and she's kind of an inclusion guru. She's inclusionnetwork.org is her website.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lowry. I just wonder if I could just add a little bit to that. So I'm in a large Montessori campus, and we have 5 special education teachers on our campus, as well as all the other gen ed classrooms. And collaboration between Montessori and SPED is sometimes difficult because special ed teachers are not trained in Montessori. And so it's kind of like we need to learn the same language. And then Montessori a lot of times has a lot of independent work time, but sometimes we struggle because our shared students need a lot more explicit instruction and don't necessarily get it the first time or the second time. And sometimes the materials may be overstimulating, sometimes not. And so sometimes the collaboration piece is tricky. And so I don't know if there's any feedback from your experience you might have in terms of helping us to work together to kind of bridge that gap, because I think there is a gap between SPED and Montessori, and I'd love to, have your thoughts on that.
I completely and totally agree with you in every way, and it's really unfortunate. And as you outlined it, those are the reasons, right? I worked all last year with a large Montessori charter school, 750 students, a SPED department of, I think, probably about the same size, 5 or 6, early childhood through middle school program. And the work that we did for the entire year was helping those two groups become a team of one, where all of them were responsible for every student in the school. It was about translations to begin with, because, Montessorians tend to slip into Montessoriese. And as SPED people, we've got our language as well, right? So it's making those connections literally with the language to begin with, but then helping each group, I think, appreciate their expertise, but also appreciating the expertise of the other and getting to a place where everybody can feel comfortable learning from one another because we are sharing responsibility. It's not, the general education teacher doesn't get to say, that child's not my responsibility, that child's a special education kid, right? And that happens. Unfortunately, it happens. And the same thing, I've heard special education teachers say, particularly in charter and public Montessori schools, that if I work with other children that don't have an IEP, it won't count towards my minutes, which is actually not a correct interpretation of the federal law. Their minutes can be a number of things, but it's a big, complicated issue, Lucy, and it takes a lot of work. And as I said, I worked with a school for a whole year on it, and we were beginning to make some changes. It wasn't, even after a year, it wasn't, okay, this is great. We've all got it. They were still working on it, and they had some goals that they were going to continue to work towards. So yeah, it's a great question. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Okay, let's see. What can we get done in 5 minutes here? Okay, Dr. Lorenz, we got you. Thank you, Carol from New Zealand. Oh, I'm jealous. I may want to come and visit you one day, Carol.
Well, okay. I will say a couple things. So I've shared with you, I've shared with you all, the collective audience, the link to the book that you referenced. I believe it's the right one. I shared a link to the organization that you shared earlier. I can't remember what it was. And I also shared a YouTube channel for those of you that are asking for recordings, whether it's publicly or a direct message. So there's going to be, it won't happen like tonight as soon as this finishes, but surely the recording will be posted there so that you can share it. And then I also, I believe I did. I also shared a link to the Montessori.org website. So for those of you that watch this and you said, yeah, this is an area of particular interest that you want to explore more, Christine does a series of workshops in varying length that explore in more, obviously in more depth when it's not just 1 hour about some of these strategies. So I've shared all of that with you on the chat.
And I just put my one of my Facebook pages is Montessori Inclusion for Today's Children, and we also have a group under the same name. My other Facebook page is Montessori Now, and you're welcome to check it out and to join in if you would like. I'd love to see you there. So yeah, as Robin said, I teach courses for the Montessori Foundation. I work with schools and I work with educators doing coaching and consultation and customized professional development on this topic in particular.
So, with that, again, like as I mentioned earlier on, this is of course a topic that even if we're not special educators or specialists in inclusion, is something that we're all dealing with, or the schools we're working with, because it's, the question is, how do we meet this wide range of children? And so, Christine, with that, I want to obviously thank you again. And I also want to share, yes, and I will, in Dr. Ward, I will reshare it, or maybe Tim, if you're there, Tim, if you're listening, can you do a direct link in the, to everybody with the professional development, so you can just go directly to that without searching? But Christine, I want to thank you again. And I also wanted to just talk briefly, because we haven't talked about Sarasota University. So obviously this colloquium is something that Sarasota University does as a service to the Montessori community. And so if you've gotten it from CGMS or Montessori Foundation or Sarasota University, we strongly encourage you to keep an eye out for the topics that we're going to be sharing. Sarasota University is a very small university. I'd say that, as we're talking about transition, right? Like in reframing our minds, Sarasota University, we're going through our own transition. But currently we offer 2 master's degree programs, one in Montessori education, one in Montessori leadership, hoping to add some already developed programs in the near future. And we got a lot of really exciting things. Those of you who joined us late, part of that is the introduction of our new president, Dr. Michael Levins, but we're a lot of exciting things doing. So if you haven't heard of Sarasota University and are interested in some of these topics, I would strongly encourage you to just go check us out. And at the very least, keep an eye out for a colloquium that happen every month. And then before everybody leaves, Ms. Lowry is also going to be joining us next month, that she just volunteered for, on a something more specialized in reading instruction. Am I correct, Christine, that maybe you want to just put that plug out there now, that if this is something that you're interested in, you could join, and please feel free to share.
So, yeah, so I will share some information about the science of reading and a framework that is consistent with the science of reading. In fact, it is researched and shown to be evidence-based best practice for teaching all students how to read, particularly students who are struggling. It's called structured literacy. It's a course that I teach for the foundation. But I think it's important that we really begin to pay attention to the science of reading. It's been around for 23 years. And we really need to look at how it might impact and inform the way that we are teaching reading in the Montessori classroom. So,
yeah. So that will be
lots to talk about.
Yeah. So that will be next, whatever the third Wednesday is. I'm not that prepared, but that will be the third Wednesday of next month. And if somebody's more adept at they could share the date, but we will be sharing it through the same avenues, through Sarasota University, Montessori Foundation, CGMS. And again, we strongly encourage you to share that with your colleagues. And if you feel like this is something that'd be helpful for your whole staff, bring them all. So with that, Tim, I see your hand up. And then before we close out, I'll let you say what you have to say, and then we'll.
I just think it's fun, since Christine mentioned animals and we're all talking about this, as we've been doing it, some of you may have seen animals in my lap. And I'm going to turn the camera, and I want you to see a little dog who's on a couch and she's sleeping. There's a little dog who needs a bath next to her, and a cat watching. So that little black dog has very short legs, and she was not able to get up on the couch. And while we were going through this, I watched her 35 times try to get up on the couch, trying to get a little further back, jumping up and down, going and laying down a little bed over here that she's abandoned, until she finally managed to climb up. And while she was doing it, I kept thinking, should I go and just pick her up? That's the idea of observation. And she got up and she turned to me and she smiled. And I think that willingness to let children do it for themselves with minimal help from us,
Yep.
to have a sense of their own power is really, really core to everything in our lives. Children, marriage, schools, and with dogs.
Thank you, Tim.
So, and then thank you, Golden Mountain Montessori School. The date is February 15th. So that's the third Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll send out links, all that good stuff. But again, I just want to, I know that, right now we're back in school in the thick of things, coming off the holidays. And so, Christine, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, for volunteering for next time. I want to thank those of you all who took time in your evening after working long days with children, and many of us, for joining us, and just tell you, you all know this, but it's important work, and I really appreciate it. And yes, those of you here, add your email address. Yes, please just feel free. I'll put my email in here too. So if you don't go to the Montessori Foundation or CGMS and add to the mailing list. You can email me directly. I will make sure you get added to the list. So thank you all for joining, and the recording will be on the YouTube website for Sarasota University, and I put that in the chat as well. So thank you all.
And congratulations, Dr. Levens.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone.
Thank
Absolute
you.
pleasure.
Thank you very
All the
much.
best. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Good night, Christine. It was
Good night.